We're going to be continuing our discussion on amplitude and period, and when we're doing this, part of what I'm trying to get across to you is that these graphs are simply just an extension of a table that we make of values. And so there's a certain regularity to them because of what we are picking as our values, okay? And so all these graphs pretty much have the same everything until we start to add numbers in and we start to manipulate those little things. And so what my goal for you is to see those original graphs. We're just doing certain little things to them. Okay, and so when we're doing this, we're going to look at those little things and figure out how they affect what we're actually doing. Okay, so we're going to graph 2 here, right to start out. And I'm going to show you a way to outline this to kind of help you. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the equation itself and what it says about the amplitude. If you remember, the amplitude is A, which in this case is going to be 3. So our amplitude is already cranked up a little bit. It's 3. So that's how high and low it goes, kind of like this, okay? And when we talk about our period, that's how long our graph goes before it starts to repeat itself. Well, we remember that this is 2 pi normally, except we're going to divide it by b, which is b here. So we're going to have 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Now, what I wanted to try to get you to understand in that last video was that when we start to talk about, our graph itself, our values are what is important. And so if we are going and we're knowing that our period is pi, we know that we're only going to go to pi. We're going to graph one cycle, we're going to go to pi. And the last example that I did in the previous video showed us an easy way to do this, because we know that the sine graph follows an S, sort of like this, right? And so if this is going to be pi down here, and this is going to be 0, halfway in between, it's going to get to the axis again. And so I need to figure out what halfway in between is. Well, if I'm at pi, half of that would be pi over 2. Okay? And halfway between those 2 points, I get to my high point, so that's going to be pi over 4, because that's halfway between 0 and pi over 2. Whoops. So that's pi over 4, there we go. And if this is pi over 2, then this is going to be 3 pi over 4. Okay, and that's where it hits its minimum here. Okay, and so the amplitude tells us how high and low it's going to go. So instead of putting 1 on there, I'm just going to go ahead and put 3 on there right away. And I've already got everything I need. Do you see how this shook out? And so I know that sine starts at 0. It reaches its high point. It goes to 0 again. It reaches its low point, which should be -3. And then it goes to 0 once again. And so when I connect these dots, I've got a graph that looks exactly like the sine curve that we have traditionally done, except what I have done and what you have done at home is we've adjusted these values. So instead of going to 2 pi, it only goes to pi because our period told us so. It goes to 3 instead of 1 because our period told us, because our amplitude told us so. Okay? That's what I'm trying to get you guys to get out of this, is that this is really just a process of doing what we've done and adjusting it a little bit, adjusting the values a little bit. Okay, so if you want to try this one on your own, go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and keep going and show you how it goes. So, amplitude. My amplitude is going to be A, which in this case is 4. And my period is going to be, once again, it's going to be 2 pi over B. And so that's going to be 2 pi over 1/2. Okay, so this is going to give me 4 pi, because dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, so that'd be 2 pi times 2, which would be 4 pi. Okay, so now, when I'm laying out my values, I know that my end value is going to be 4 pi. Recall, our cosine graph starts high, goes low, goes high again. And so if this is our 4 pi here, This is our 0. Halfway in between, it's going to reach its low, so that's going to be 2 pi. So halfway in the middle, at 2 pi, we know we're going to have our low value, our minimum value. And halfway between that is going to cross the x-axis here and here. So this is going to be 3 pi, and this is going to be pi. We're dividing it into 4. I'm laying out 5 points, guys, okay? I'll show you those 5 points here in a second. Pi and 3 pi. And really from here, it's pretty simple because my high point is going to be at my amplitude, which I know is 4. And my low point is going to be at -4. And now I can grab my pink here and we're gonna outline it. Here's 1 point. Here's 2 points. Here's my 3rd point because I know that cosine goes low. Here's my 4th point, and here's my 5th point amongst my calculations. And when I connect these dots, not quite as smooth as I would like, but we get the idea here. That's it. I plot out my 5 points. My max, my 0, my min, my 0, and my max. Guys, we're just adjusting what we've already done here. Okay? And so the next part, and this is part of the extension part, we're going to talk about reflections. Now, sometimes we'll get a negative value, and they'll give us something where they'll say 3 sine of -2x. Well, we remember that sine is an odd function, and so sine of -2x allows us to say that that's equal to negative sine of 2x. Okay? We're switching the negative out. Alright? And so when we do 3 cosine of -2x, we remember that cosine is even. So this is going to be equal to 3 cosine of 2x. It remains the same. We're going to see how negatives affect us here in just 1 second. But that's very important to remember because it makes our lives easier, really, because we don't have to deal with a negative in here. We can simply just put the negative here, and you're going to see how exactly that helps us, because when we move down here, I want to show you something. Really, when we graph a function like this, okay, and we have a -2x here, okay, it doesn't affect it except that it flips everything. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph 2 cosine x. So my amplitude equals 2. I hope you don't mind that I abbreviate. So my amplitude is going to equal 2. And so I'm going to graph my regular cosine graph. And here's what it's going to look like. Because my amplitude is 2, this is going to go from 2 to -2. And notice my period is from -2 pi to 4 pi. I'm not going to worry about that just yet because I know that if -2 pi is over here, didn't quite make my line long enough, but that's fine. And if 2 pi is here, that makes this 4 pi. Because the cycle repeats itself, guys, I know that halfway in between, it's going to reach its minimum. Halfway in between, it's going to reach its minimum. And halfway in between, it's going to reach its minimum. And I'm going to need some points here to outline for me exactly how this is going to go. And so I'm not graphing this function, I'm graphing 2 cosine x. I'm graphing it without the negative first. And so I know that cosine starts at its maximum, crosses halfway in between where it reaches its minimum, and it crosses again, goes to its maximum, and it continues to do its thing all the way down. Notice how I'm laying out these points. And I know that it'll do the same thing on this side. And guys, this is actually really just a system. Laying out some nice easy points. Plotting these waves based on what we know. I haven't done anything you don't know how to do yet. Okay? We're following the pattern, guys. Because this cosine graph, it starts high. It starts at its maximum amplitude. Halfway between where it reaches its minimum, it crosses the x-axis. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points per cycle. Then I have another cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another cycle over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now I'm going to outline this in red. And so if I have this is the cosine of 2x, if this point were negative, it'd be down here. If this point were negative, it'd be up here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and I'm going to switch all of these values. And so my graph of negative is really just the opposite of what it was. Okay, messed up a little bit there. It's still crossing the x-axis at the same points because, think about it guys, the value there is 0. And so this red curve is flipped over. Okay, so what we do is, for a summary, if we have negative a, so negative amplitude, simply flip the graph. Okay, that's it. That's all there is to it. A couple more examples of a vertical translation. Let's consider for a second y equals x squared. Looks something like this, right? You remember this from algebra? But if I did y equals x squared minus 3, I would just move this down 3, and the graph would look exactly the same, right? So move it down 3. It's the same, the exact same for a cosine function or a sine function. So this is going to tell me vertical translation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing. Amplitude is 3, period, is 2 pi over 2, and vertical translation is going to be negative 4. What I like to do first, guys, is I really like to plot it as it was, then translate it. Okay, so I'm going to deal with these two things first. So when I'm laying this out, I know that my period is equal to pi. So I'll put pi out this way. I know I'm going to need the halfway point. I know I'm going to need halfway between those two. I know I'm going to need this. Okay, my amplitude is going to be 3 and negative 3. Actually, I should probably move those in, huh? Because we're going to be translating. Don't worry about it, guys. It's easy. I'm going to put 3 here, actually, because that'll help me when I graph the translation. Okay, so 3 and negative 3. And so when I lay out my points, I know it's sine, so it's going to start at 0. It gets to its max. It crosses. It gets to its min. And it gets back to 0. So this is my initial graph. Okay? So this is my initial graph. My final graph is going to move up 4. So I'm just going to take every point and move it up 4. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So here's 7 here. So if it's going to be negative 3, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So all of my points are going to move up. So this one's going to move up 4. So it's at 0, so it goes to 4. This one's at 3, it goes to 7. This one was at 0, it goes to 4. This one was at negative 3, it goes to 1. And this one was at 0, it goes to 4. So here's my final graph, guys. That's it. That's all there is to it. And so the amplitude and the period, that skill stays the same. Then all you need to do is use the vertical translation. After you spend some time graphing the initial function, you can put it in dots, you can put it in dotted form, and that's perfectly fine. Okay? That's it, guys. That's all I got for you for right now. Thanks for watching.